So we're still talking about seeking redress of grievances, and in this clip I just want to give some quick examples of what that means to help illustrate. Like I've mentioned, it can take all kinds of different forms. It's not necessarily any kind of formal petition, although a formal petition is one form of petitioning for redress of grievances. Certainly that fits within the umbrella. But otherwise, there are a lot of other things that fit under that umbrella too, including everything from sending letters to your congressman, or a phone call, or an email, or just a text. And it doesn't have to be your congressman. It can be your mayor. It can be your city manager. It can be your county commissioner. It can be anyone who is a government official. Anytime you approach one of those government officials, one of those government representatives, and you explain the issue and you seek resolution of that issue, whether it's your mailbox that was torn off by the garbage truck or whatever the case may be. It can be your school district and the school bus service for your children. Anytime you approach them in any way, it fits within the umbrella of petitioning for redress of grievances. So I just want to give a couple of concrete examples based on my experience recently and cases that I'm aware of and things that I've been involved in, people that I know, that sort of thing. Here locally where we are, one of the things that I've been involved in quite a bit in the last few years is efforts to kind of hold government accountable in terms of operating openly and transparently. Here in Utah, we have an Open and Public Meetings Act. And so these are concepts that apply at every level of government. And what we find is that oftentimes, once people take office, they try to do things without being completely open and transparent about it. There's just this natural tendency to do that. And so one of the things that has happened here locally is we've petition for redress of grievances in a number of different ways to hold everything from the local school district to the county commissioner, to the county commission, I should say, to town councils, all accountable to comply with the Utah Open and Public Meetings Act. And we've done that in a variety of ways. In some ways, it's just been a matter of confronting them with their alleged violations or concerns about whether or not they're complying. That's a means of seeking redress of grievances. In other cases, we've contacted the local county attorney and we've brought it to his attention and we've asked him to do something about it. And in some cases, he has done something about it, and he has required them to do what is necessary to comply. In other cases, we've filed lawsuits. We've used that course through the judicial system to seek redress of grievances. In doing that, in some cases, we've settled, we've received judgments. In other cases, there have been disclosure. The courts have ordered disclosure of information that should have been disclosed under the Open and Public Meetings Act. So that's just one example. Another example has to do with a land use and zoning ordinance that was adopted by the county commission in this county in which I live. It's a large rural agricultural county, and it adopted a land use ordinance that we felt like would be much more fitting in an urban metropolitan area, but we were kind of asleep at the switch when they passed the ordinance, and so we were left kind of trying to play catch up. Once we realized what the ordinance really said, this monstrosity of a multi-hundred-page ordinance, and so we approached first the executive branch through the administrative arm, which is the planning commission. We went to the planning commissioners and said, what were you thinking when you passed this land use ordinance? And they said, well, we didn't really know what we were doing. We had the county commissioners hired this outside consultant who came and told us, this is what you need to do. This is what everyone else is doing, so you just need to pass this ordinance. So we didn't really understand the thing, but we recommended it to the county commission. So go talk to them. So we sought redress of our grievances to the county commission. We went and talked to them, and we said, what were you thinking when you voted to pass this ordinance? And they said, well, you know what? We've got this expert outside consultant that we're paying big money to. He said we should pass it, so we thought, what the heck? Nobody showed up at the public hearings, and it sounded good. So we said, did you read the ordinance? Did you understand it? One of the county commissioners tried to say that he had read the ordinance and that he thought that it was good. Another of the county commissioners said that he hadn't even bothered to read the ordinance. He said he scanned through it a little bit and realized that even if he had read it, he wouldn't be able to understand it. So what was the point of even reading it? So he said, so you voted to pass an ordinance that you didn't even read or understand. At that point, we decided that another way to seek redress of grievances was to get rid of some of those county commissioners. And so one of them had been in office for 3 terms already, and we decided it was definitely time for him to go, and he was beat in the primary election. We engaged in an active campaign to replace him during the primary election. The other county commissioner we would have actually been happy enough to keep because he'd only been in 1 term, good enough guy, but on the basis of his passing this land use ordinance without reading it, we decided it was time for him to go too. So we supported another candidate for county commission. And that leads to an entirely other story about seeking redress of grievances, because in that primary election, it was a very close race, and it ended up coming down to 1 vote difference between the two. And so the challenger, according to the results the night of the primary election, had beat the incumbent by 1 vote. But when they came back and did a canvass of the election, the county commissioners said that the incumbent had beat the challenger. So at that point, we started digging a little deeper, and we requested a recount. And in the process of doing all of that, and this is just another example of how you seek redress of grievances. It fits within that umbrella. We requested a recount, and then they came back and reached the same results. So we dug even deeper, and we engaged in an election contest, as it is known, and we actually applied to the judicial branch at that point in time, seeking redress of our grievances. And eventually, that election was actually thrown out in court. The district court, the state district court, found that it was a bogus election, that there were so many election irregularities that there is no way that it could be upheld and found to be valid. So the district court judge threw out the election and ordered a new election. Eventually, that was appealed to the Utah Supreme Court, and the Utah Supreme Court, in further redress of grievances, upheld the decision to throw out the election, said it was a bogus election. This is an election year in 2016. A lot of discussion about rigged elections. Well, it happens at all levels, and there were so many irregularities at that level of government that in 2014, the Utah Supreme Court upheld a decision to throw out the bogus election in the county in which I live. Again, an example of how to seek redress of grievances and how that works and how it fits under the umbrella. So another illustration that I want to talk about is the case involving, it's called Klen, K-L-E-N, versus City of Loveland, Colorado. This clip isn't for legal beagles, but for people who are legal beagles, I'll give you the citation. 661 Federal 3rd, page 498, 10th Circuit, 2011. It's a case about a couple of brothers who were real estate developers who had applied for a building permit in the city of Loveland, Colorado. And the building permit application was taking so long that they went in and complained to the city. And in response to their complaint, the city took even longer and started retaliating against the Klen brothers. So in response to the retaliation, the Klen brothers started saying more about the government. They started complaining. They complained to the city manager. They complained to the city councilmen. All of those are methods of seeking redress of grievances. That's why it's in the First Amendment, because it all fits together. They are exercising freedom of speech and freedom of expression. And what the case ultimately said is that governments cannot retaliate against citizens for seeking redress of grievances. We have a constitutional right to freedom of speech, freedom of expression, and in that case, the Federal Court of Appeals actually found that that's what had happened in the case, that the Klen brothers had been retaliated against based on their seeking redress of grievances. Well, the way they were trying to seek redress of grievances initially was just by complaining to their city officials. They were going in saying, hey buddy, what's taken so long with my application? That's a way to petition for redress of grievances. It fits within the umbrella. Under our Constitution, governments cannot retaliate against citizens for seeking redress of grievances. And the last example I want to give involves, well, I may have two more examples, but one of the examples I want to give involves a local state court judge. And what happened in this case is he invited all the attorneys in the area to go to lunch, and he explained that he recently had a paradigm shift that he wanted them to be aware of. He said that he had been, previous to being appointed to the bench, he'd been assistant county attorney, he'd been a prosecutor. He'd always given everyone, including law enforcement officers, the benefit of the doubt and assumed that they were always telling the truth. But he said he'd recently had an experience in which he learned that that's not always the case. He explained that on the day in question, he had finished with his caseload a little early, and so he jumped in his car and he was commuting back home from the office. He hit cruise control. He was out on the freeway, hit cruise control in that area. It was, there's an 80-mile-an-hour speed limit. He hit cruise at 80. And as he was traveling down the pike, he noticed the red and blue flashing lights of a state trooper, so he pulled over. The state trooper pulled him over and said, sir, can I see your driver's license and registration? To which he responded. The officer said, do you know why I pulled you over? And the judge said, I have no idea why you pulled me over. And the officer said, well, do you know how fast you were going? And the judge said, yeah, I was going 80 miles an hour. That's the speed limit, and that's what I set my cruise. And the officer said, well, I clocked you doing 95, so I'm going to write you a citation. Well, the judge, he kept it all under wraps. He didn't have any major reaction at that point, but the next morning he sought redress of grievances. He called the trooper's supervisor and basically said, Mr. Supervisor, we've got a problem. Houston, we've got a problem. He was seeking redress of grievances. He explained to the supervisor what had happened. That's all it takes to seek redress of grievances. That's what the judge did. That's what you can do. That's what I do sometimes. Anytime we approach one of our government officials or representatives and we bring an issue to their attention and we seek resolution of that issue, no matter what it is, it all fits in the category and the umbrella of seeking redress of grievances. And so the last just example that I want to give involved the Cowboy Express Grass March, organized by Grant Gerber and other ranchers, attorneys, people in Nevada on behalf of the beleaguered ranchers in the Battle Mountain District of Nevada. And they just weren't getting, no matter what they did to try to seek redress of their grievances, they weren't getting any attention. So they finally ended up organizing this Cowboy Express Grass March that rode horses in Pony Express style from the Pacific Ocean to the Atlantic Ocean. And while they were in Washington, D.C., they delivered a petition to their elected representatives and requested them to take action and do something about it. That's yet another example of the methods that might be included under the umbrella of petitioning to seek redress of grievances, but it includes the whole gamut. All of those are part of seeking redress of grievances from our government.